CBS 4 News begins now with a next weather alert.
Hurricane Ian is battering the west coast of Florida hours after making landfall in Cayo Costa. This is a live look from Hillsborough County, which is further north up in the Tampa area. And here is a look at the devastation happening in southwest Florida. This is video from Vanderbilt Beach, which is south of Fort Myers. You can see how high water is reaching in that parking garage, nearly up to the top of some of those cars.
And here is a look at where Ian is right now, as of course it has reached landfall a couple of hours ago, and it is heading east across the state and making a buzzsaw heading to the northeast part of the state. The National Weather Service confirmed that 8 tornadoes did touch down over the past 24 hours.
And we are live on air and always streaming on CBS News Miami with the CBS News app. Good evening. I'm Lauren Pastrana.
And I'm Jim Barry. Elliott is off. More than 1 million people across Florida are without power tonight. We have next weather chief meteorologist and hurricane specialist Ivan Cabrera monitoring conditions where the storm is hitting, as well as here in our area. So, Ivan, tell us exactly what's going on right now.
Recap for our friends are in Fort Myers. In fact, the worst of the weather for us here in South Florida is pretty much done. But behind me, you see just something incredible and something you don't see. Well, you can go seasons without it, right? As far as hurricanes here, a Category 4, borderline Category 5, making landfall here across a very populated area of Florida, southwest Florida, here specifically across Fort Myers Beach, and into Cape Coral here. And it just made just kind of the worst track for a storm surge there. And you saw the Gulf of Mexico, unfortunately, just basically over Fort Myers. The damage and the pictures that we've been showing you are nothing compared to what we're going to see, I think, when it is safe to get out there and scope the damage, because this is going to be one for the record books here. Incredible storm. 5 p.m. advisory north at 8. That's been the problem, right? It's basically crawling here with that core of 155 mile-an-hour winds. Latest advisory has it at 140. But let me show you some of the gauges here as we get into this landfall. Cayo Costa there at 150. That was the official landfall across the islands here. But then it made a mainland landfall across Punta Gorda with 145 mile-an-hour winds just a few minutes later. But 305 was the official landfall. Current conditions right now, still seeing the worst of the storm right on top of basically the same area here, and we've had some changes as far as the winds. But let me show you some of the numbers here. By the way, we lost Fort Myers and we lost Naples as far as the instruments there, so we have not had data from them for hours. But in Punta Gorda, where the storm is basically the eye over, I think we're going to basically in a few minutes here, we're going to see these numbers just collapse because the center will be on top of them there. So Punta Gorda looking at 123 mile-an-hour wind gusts right now, sustained at 77. We are looking at Venice at 54 miles an hour, sustained at 79. And by the way, Punta Gorda has seen triple-digit wind gusts now since 2 o'clock. So this has been a relentless storm that has been ongoing. There you see them in the 90s and then into the 100s for the last several hours as conditions continue to be quite dangerous there. Now, interestingly enough for us, yes, we're going to get these squalls moving through, but I think the dangerous part of the storm is certainly out of our picture now. Tornado watch that we had in effect, that has been canceled. That will not be reissued. We're looking at that well further to the north now. So what are we left with? Well, these skinnier bands that are moving through, not as frequently as we had yesterday. The tornado threat diminishing, and we see the bands coming through with 20, 40 mile-an-hour wind gusts. Nothing damaging here, and I don't think we're going to have certainly anything close to what we had yesterday at this time, and certainly through the overnight hours. So right now, it's just pockets of showers and storms, and of course the ground is saturated. So you get a few of these showers, you get into the flood advisories here. I don't think we'll have additional flash flood warnings. But we're going to continue monitoring these bands as they come through. But, they're far and few between now. And so I think for the most part, we are done as far as the worst of the storm, as it will continue to pull off to the north. And as it does that, some dry air is going to work its way in here. And I think we're going to be in a very dry stretch beginning tomorrow and continuing into the weekend. As far as the track now for the rest of Central Florida there, it is going to roll through Orlando with some significant wind. I think that we'll have power outages. It will have some minor damage there. 60 mile-an-hour wind gusts are certainly possible. And then it actually goes back out to the Atlantic and then curves back in. So this is going to be now Had a landfall in Cuba. We had a landfall across essentially the southwestern part of Florida here, and now again heading up and towards Georgia. So I'll leave you with the 7-day forecast here so you can see that we are looking good for the rest of this week. Weather alerts are down. We are not expecting anything significant as far as the rain chances. We are looking at only 20% coverage heading into the weekend. Folks have been asking how much longer will this last. Well, you see there things quieting down big time for us, guys.
And Ivan, before you go, we do have some questions for you. I'm sure a lot of people curious about the storm surge that you've talked so much about over these last few days, specifically now on the southwest Florida coast. I've been seeing some of these videos from Naples, Fort Myers, Bokeelia, Punta Gorda. It's so bad. The water is so high. What are we talking about here? How many feet could we see of storm surge in that area?
Well, we've had reports of upwards of 7 feet. I mean, that's just, over most people's heads, right? And we've seen cars that have been completely submerged here. But as I mentioned, I think we're now into kind of that space where we don't have as much information because the areas that have seen the worst damage, the catastrophic damage that I think no question that will be revealed as we get into some quieter times for tomorrow. We'll really know the extent of this. But you had 150-mile-an-hour winds. The gusts have been registered here, so it's not something that we were estimated. Gauges that survived 140-mile-an-hour winds pushing the storm surge in, and that has to go somewhere. It has been going up through the rivers here, the inlets, and the flooding has just been incredible. We've been showing you the reverse storm surge in Tampa Bay. Folks should not be out there. That water's obviously going to come back rather quickly there. We're not looking at a storm surge pushing back in. It's just the water that receded from the winds coming offshore into the Gulf. They're going to come back there. But as far as the storm surge, this is one of the worst we've seen here. And in fact, I'm watching all the reports, and some veteran folks that have been out there as far as meteorologists that have been covering this for a long time, as I have there, have been saying they haven't seen something quite like this. So this is, if you remember Michael back in 2018, I think the damage is going to be about parallel to that.
Ivan, let me ask you this. On Monday, Ian is a tropical storm. 3 days later, it's almost a Category 5. Why are storms getting so strong so quickly?
Yeah, that was forecast, Jim. Basically, it's going through areas that have very warm water, which is the fuel for the storms. This was known to be to rapidly intensify because of that. And then we had just high pressure over it. I mean, just conditions were just ripe for this to become an intense hurricane. There, sure, you can talk about long range and how we were going to have more frequent storms, and the storms that do form are going to be more intense. But this one just basically took advantage of its local weather here, which basically was warm sea surface temperatures, low wind shear, which can disrupt a cyclone here, and that did not happen. We didn't think that would happen. Incredibly, though, and we'll have research on each particular storm and this one as well, it was fascinating to me to watch that ring that typically can kind of, once it goes through an eyewall replacement cycle, it can weaken. It almost went through it like nothing here, and the winds just remained at that 140, 155 as it moved onshore there, basically holding its strength and the worst possible event there in Southwest Florida.
And Ivan, I know in the past we've talked about just how much the technology for forecasting hurricanes accurately has improved, but just a couple of days ago, all the focus was on Tampa. That's where we thought this storm was aiming for, instead making landfall farther south. Why is it still so tough to nail down these paths? So
what happens is, we depend certainly on these computer model forecasts here, and so we are glued to them. I'll roll through here backwards. You can see kind of what's happening in Punta Gorda right now, because the winds are still clocking at 100, 125 miles an hour. So as far as the forecast, we have a good bet on what happens here when you talk about these hurricanes that track along the Atlantic, right? But once they get into a situation where there are several factors that are steering them, remember, hurricanes don't steer themselves. If you have nothing going around them, they're just going to sit there and basically stall out. So what happened here, we had this trough that was going to pick it up and really kind of just pull it up into Tampa. That got left behind, so it slowed down, and then it was basically just doing that turn to the east where the winds began to pick it up. At that point, it was too late. Worst possible case you can have is a hurricane slowing down like this, and that's exactly what happened to this one. I mean, it didn't stall, but 8 miles an hour with 155 mile an hour winds, you can do the math there, and that was over the same area for several hours. I mean, it's still at this hour, Punta Gorda, is gusting to 123 miles an hour.
Wow.
And Venice is still around 80. And again, as I mentioned, Fort Myers, we lost the measurements there, but I have seen some reports of 120 to 145 mile an hour winds. And that wind, by the way, was coming from the Gulf into the bays and inlets there. So that was the storm surge, and that's why we've been talking about the potential for 12 to 15 feet of storm surge. Again, we are in a point right now where we just don't know the extent of what we're going to see, but just having gone through these, we know it's just going to be devastating. In some areas here, it's just going to be completely leveled. Fort Myers Beach is underwater by feet.
Wow.
It's going to be a long night there for those folks. All right, Ivan, thank you so much.